Bulimia was my vice. That was the eating disorder that I had a full-blown love affair with. I was bulimic for 5 years and it absolutely controlled my life. I thought that I would be in my grave before I could keep my meals down, and it destroyed me because you're addicted to the high. Throwing up was a high for me. My brain had a chemical reaction when I would purge that's just the same as someone injecting themselves with a drug. Welcome back to my channel, guys. Today's video is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to seeing on my channel. I do want to put a disclaimer. As you can see by the title, we're going to be discussing something very, very serious today and very triggering for some people. We're going to be talking about my experience with an eating disorder and the road that I took to recovery. If that triggers you in any way, please just click out of this video. For those of you that feel comfortable watching, thank you so much for being here. I enjoy talking about my experience with an eating disorder because I wish that I would have had someone that I could have related to or looked up to when I was in the depths of it, although that would have been very difficult for me to really recognize how much help I needed. I really, really hope that I'm able to reach the right people with this video and that I'm able to inspire you and really show you that there is life after addiction. I am so passionate about eating disorder recovery. It's something that I try to bring awareness to whenever I can. It is a very real addiction. It's deadly, it's terrifying, and it's something that consumes so many men and women. We don't realize how society plays such a big part in feeding this type of addiction. I really want to walk you guys through exactly how my eating disorder developed and some of the signs that others probably saw around me that you can look for in people that may be showing signs of starting these behaviors or playing with them in any way so that you're able to discuss things with them and get them help. I am more than happy to make videos or further discuss how to help others that you suspect may have eating disorder behaviors, what to do if you're dealing with a family member, etc. Because I've been on this side of things, I know that it can be really difficult and scary on how to approach someone who is in the depth of addiction, and I understand that it's terrifying, but I would be more than happy to make a video on exactly how to do that. So if that's something that you're interested in, just go ahead and let me know. If you haven't yet, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. It is totally free to subscribe to my channel. I have been producing a ton of content for you. I am really, really excited for what's to come. So go ahead and hit subscribe. That way you won't miss any videos that I upload. And if you are grateful that I'm being really vulnerable and discussing things that are a little bit difficult to discuss, then go ahead and give this a thumbs up. It really, really helps out my channel, and it just gives me the opportunity to reach more people and help those who really need to hear this message. Let's go ahead and dive into how I really started showing signs of becoming obsessed with food, obsessed with my body. I definitely think that most eating disorders do start with disordered eating, and it is not the same thing. Having an eating disorder is a clinical diagnosis, and having disordered eating is something that I think a lot of people experience, especially women in today's society. Women develop in their teen years having fear foods or believing that certain foods make you fat, which is absolutely devastating. A lot of that can be very, very damaging to a woman's self-esteem, and if you have disordered eating, then it is likely that it can become as severe as turning into and developing into an eating disorder. I started showing signs of having disordered eating at a very young age. When I was in middle school, I was never the really skinny, pretty girl. I definitely never felt like I got a lot of attention. I had a lot of friends and I was really, really outgoing, but I was definitely never like the pretty girl. I was always a little bit chubbier growing up. I just really started to recognize that as I got older. When I was 12 years old, I remember trying to eliminate sugar from my diet. I remember when I was sitting in like that little class in middle school when you have like a foods teacher and telling her like, oh, guess what I'm doing? Like I am eliminating sugar from my diet, and she told me good job, and I was like this little 7th grader. I was creating fear foods for myself without even realizing it by trying an elimination diet at the age of 12. That's insane. And I also want to say that I definitely don't blame my parents, my friends, or anybody for any of the experiences that I had. Parents are just trying to do their best, and I know that my parents would have prevented this if they could have, but it's just something that I personally believe I was born with. I think that I developed an eating disorder, and that was something that would have happened to me regardless of the family that I was born into. I do think there are ways to prevent eating disorders if we have awareness and we're educated on it, but my parents weren't educated on eating disorders. And so I do just want to say that this is in no way their fault or any type of lack of care on their part. But as I was developing these fear foods, it just kind of started to spiral. At first, I was afraid of eating anything that had sugar in it, and then I started to become more aware of foods that were fatty or foods that people would talk about that were high calorie. Slowly over time, the amount of foods that I felt were safe became smaller and smaller and smaller. I think it's really important to remember that teenagers absorb a lot of information that they don't really understand, and it sticks with them. So I remember people making comments about certain foods that led to years of me being terrified to eat certain things, being so afraid that certain foods were gonna make me fat because of one little comment that I heard here and there from a family member or a friend. And I'm sure that I did the same thing. I'm sure I repeated some of those comments and negatively contributed to somebody else's mental health. And that's why I feel like it is so important to talk about these things, because we all are contributing to a society that is in all reality not body positive, not food inclusive, and that is detrimental for our children and the generations that are up and coming. I just really want to bring awareness to discussing the way that food serves us. I can go more in depth on that in a different video, but I do want to touch on how that contributed to me developing disordered eating because of all of the comments that I was hearing about certain foods and what was good for your body and what was bad for your body. At that age, I never should have even been hearing comments in terms of weight loss. Like I mentioned, I was a pretty chubby kid, and as I got older, I just naturally started to thin out and lose the weight. So when I was in about 8th grade, I had lost about 25 pounds, and I got a ton of praise. People were calling me beautiful and telling me how incredible I looked. I was really hitting puberty at the time, and so I started to develop this association with getting praise with losing weight and being thin. And at the time, I obviously didn't recognize that I was making that correlation, but I was, and that definitely did not serve me later in life. I lost all of this weight naturally, and then I felt like I needed to hold on to it. And I was way more aware of the fact that I had lost weight. I felt more beautiful. I got more attention from boys. I got more attention from friends and family members. I was involved in sports when I was in high school. I was a cheerleader. I also danced. And so I was in sports that were more body focused and very girly. When I was in high school, I was surrounded by girls for hours a day comparing myself. I think that every girl probably struggles with body comparison. I'm sure every person watching this has compared themselves to somebody else. And I feel strongly that being in that type of environment severely contributed to my disordered eating developing into an eating disorder. Once again, there was no way for anyone to know that, but I do think it's a very good thing for me to recognize so that as I raise Blakely, I know what signs to look for, and I can make my own decisions based on my own experiences, on what sports I want her to do, and what decisions I want to make with my own daughter. Being involved in cheer and dance, I knew that there were a couple other girls that struggled with eating disorders. It was more of a rumor than it was an actual fact, but you know, things got around, and there were a couple of girls that I believe developed pretty severe eating disorders that had to be resolved after high school. And I remember having an unhealthy mindset surrounding that. I was way too intrigued. I thought, wow, if only I could have the discipline to not eat. Or if only I knew how to do that in regards to bulimia or other unhealthy behaviors. I think in combination with my severe fear of food and my curiosity surrounding actual eating disorders really started to get the best of me. I also, in high school, kind of like I touched on with middle school, just did not ever feel like the pretty girl. I always felt like other girls were being chosen over me, whether that was with boys or with friends. And I just recognize now that I had some pretty deep-rooted insecurity issues, and I really didn't have a great self-esteem. And so that, in combination with comparing myself and being terrified of food and associating praise with weight loss, I was in deep and headed for disaster, whether I realized it or not. When I was in my junior year of high school, I remember that I had a pretty pivotal moment where I would say my disordered eating crossed that line and then became an eating disorder. I was sitting in my room all heartbroken over some dude. I don't remember his name now, but you know, I thought it was the end of my world. And I remember having a really, really intrusive thought that if I was thinner and if I had just been skinnier, that would have never happened to me. And I truly believed that if I was a certain size, that I wouldn't have problems, that I wouldn't experience heartbreak. That moment and that belief changed things for me. I remember thinking to myself that night, I am never going to eat again. Sadly, moving forward from that specific day, I restricted and tried to starve myself for weeks at a time. I would eat 3 things every day. I would have a protein bar in the morning, and then I would come home and I would have a tortilla and put cheese on the tortilla. So I would make like half a quesadilla. And I was eating a few hundred calories a day for weeks. And like I mentioned, I was very active because I was involved in sports at school. And I was only able to keep that up for a few weeks because I was starving. I was having an emotional high because of the restriction. If you have experienced any sort of addiction, you know the feeling of euphoria that comes with restricting or binging or getting a high. And that was very, very real to me. But when it got to a point where I feel I couldn't restrict any longer, a few months into that phase, I started to develop binge eating disorder. Because my body had gone through such a restrictive period, I then started overeating in massive amounts. Of course, this caused internal havoc for me. I was terrified of food, and I felt this intense emotional drive to eat and eat and eat, to the point of feeling extremely ill, to the point of wanting to purge through exercise, through throwing up, and that became very shameful and very secretive. Through the period of the few weeks that I had really developed anorexic behaviors, nobody knew, although my friends and parents were having some suspicions, but I was a very good liar, as all addicts are, and I hid it. I got angry, got very defensive, and would just lie my way through discussing it. When I started to develop binge eating disorder, that was a little bit more difficult. So when everybody would go to bed, I would eat in secrecy to the point of feeling absolutely ill, and it was an uncontrolled behavior. I felt almost as if I would black out and eat everything I could get my hands on, and then I would wake up the next day and start a cycle of restriction because I felt so much guilt and sadness and depression and anxiety over my behaviors from the previous night, because I would typically binge in the evenings. And then the next day I would set myself up perfectly for another binge the next night because I would starve and restrict myself throughout the entire day. As you can see, that caused an extremely unhealthy cycle of restriction and binging and restriction and binging. And I'll get more into later or in a different video on how your eating disorder starts to fuel itself, as you can see with that cycle. As the binging got worse, I started to panic and of course was absolutely terrified of gaining weight. My biggest fear was being any bigger than I already was, and I already thought that I was obese at like 130 pounds, which is so incredibly sad. My body dysmorphia was at an all-time high and nobody knew. I was doing all of this in secrecy. I was basically living a double life. I was miserable. I just started to totally panic that my body was intaking all of these calories and I had no way to get rid of them. So I will never at any point discuss how I learned how to purge, because I never want to encourage it. I never want to glorify it. I'm devastated by those actions and it did nothing but ruin that part of my life. But sadly, I did teach myself how to purge and I slowly transitioned from anorexia to binge eating disorder to now a bulimic. Bulimia was my vice. That was the eating disorder that I had a full-blown love affair with. I was bulimic for 5 years and it absolutely controlled my life. It controlled how I felt, how I thought, what I did, what I said. I would have lied my way through anything to feed my addiction. A lot of people don't view eating disorders as addictive as a drug addiction or maybe a pornography addiction or a gambling addiction or alcoholism. And I do want to bring awareness that it is just as detrimental to all of the people around you. It's just as unhealthy, it's just as deadly, if not more deadly than some of those other addictions, and it had a hold on me. I truly believed in that time frame of my life that I would never live my life without bulimia. I thought that I would be in my grave before I could keep my meals down, and it destroyed me. As I mentioned, for the first year of my actual eating disorder behaviors, they were done completely in secrecy. Absolutely nobody knew, although my friends and family had their suspicions. It did come out about a year later and my parents approached me about it. My dad came into my bedroom one morning when I was getting ready for school. He sat down on my bed and he said, "Babe, I need to ask you a question." And I just said, "Okay, what's up?" And he said, "Do you have an eating disorder?" I broke down and started bawling, and I think I was feeling two emotions. I was so relieved that for the first time I felt like somebody could actually see me. I also was terrified. When you are in the midst of addiction, you love and care more about your addiction than anything else. Any addict can attest to this. You would go to the ends of the earth to defend and protect your addiction, even those that you loved most. For me, it was terrifying to me that I knew someone wanted to take this away from me because I thought there was no life without it. My parents, of course, immediately put me in therapy. I can say without a doubt that therapy was the most monumental stepping stone from addiction to recovery for me personally. If you are watching this video and you are debating on whether you should go to therapy or not, even if you haven't crossed the line from disordered eating to an eating disorder, please go to therapy. It is the best investment you will ever make. It's an investment into your future, into your happiness, into your livelihood. Nothing is more important than your quality of life. And my therapist was the most amazing woman I have ever met. She truly did so much for me. I owe her my life, and I am so, so grateful that my parents took that step and took that step quickly to get me into someone who could help me. My therapy started out pretty extreme. I was doing outpatient therapy twice a week, and then I was meeting with a nutritionist once a week, and then I was also getting labs drawn. I was getting EKGs done at the hospital, and I was getting blood work done at a doctor's once a week. All of this was basically to make sure that my labs were okay and healthy because of the severity of my binging and purging. Of course, the nutritionist was to focus more on the food aspect of my eating disorder, and then my therapist was, of course, to help heal me mentally and emotionally. Every doctor that I worked with was absolutely incredible. I can't say enough amazing things about my therapist. Unfortunately, she's not in private practice anymore, or I think I would still be going to her literally just to hang out with her every week. But I didn't always have these wonderful fluffy feelings about the woman that I thought was trying to rip my eating disorder away from me. When I walked into her office, she asked me every question in the book that could have embarrassed me or made me feel shameful, not because it was her intent to do those things, but because those were the things that she needed to know in order to help me. I remember having to answer how many times a day I was purging, what I would use to purge, how I did it, how I would go about it, the places that I was purging, what I was binging on, the quantity of food, what it was that I was binging on, if I was restricting at all, if I was utilizing other medications or items to purge, which I, again, will never give detail on, not because of shame that I feel about it, but because I never want to contribute to someone who is struggling with an eating disorder and give them new ideas or glorify anything. I try to be very, very careful with what I say while being as honest and open with you as I can be. All of these questions were so difficult for me to answer. I felt like, oh my word, I'm coming into this office and I'm going to have this eating disorder ripped away from me, and I'm never gonna be able to do what makes me feel the best ever again, because you're addicted to the high. Throwing up was a high for me. My brain had a chemical reaction when I would purge that's just the same as someone injecting themselves with a drug. That is really, really important to remember when you're dealing with someone with an eating disorder. Their addiction is real and it's severe. They're gonna go through withdrawals just the same, even though the physical symptoms may look different. As difficult as it was, I was consistent with therapy. I was in therapy from the age of 17 to 21. I'm 26 now. I will be celebrating my 5 years of recovery. Wait, is it 6? Babe, how many years have I been recovered in February? 5 or 6?
6.
Cool.
Amazing.
I will be celebrating 6 years of recovery this upcoming February, which is just mind-blowing for me. I can't even get into how incredible my quality of life is, and that I am in a place I literally did not think existed. A lot of that is because I was consistent with therapy. My assignments, they started out small. I remember, because of my cycle of binging and restriction, one of the first things that we started to work on was my restrictive periods during the day. I was really setting myself up for failure on binging later in the evening. I am going to be doing a video on how to stop binge eating, so I won't get into too much detail, but I really had to work on how to stop being so restrictive throughout the day, and my very first assignment was to eat 1 M&M when I woke up in the morning. 1 M&M. I walked into therapy thinking I was gonna be in an inpatient facility with food being shoved down my throat and no doors on any bathrooms, someone holding my hand, and that in no way was the case. I was led into recovery very gradually, and we really learned a good balance on how to push me past my comfort zone without setting me up for failure. There were days where I would scream and cry and be so frustrated with everyone that tried to help me. There were truly times when I hated the people that loved me the most because they were trying to take my addiction from me. A really wonderful way to explain the relationship between an addict and her eating disorder is by making it a parallel to marriage. I was married to Ed, my eating disorder. A great way to explain this is that a lot of people come in contact with Ed throughout their lifetime. Some people flirt with him. Some people date him. Some people are in long-term relationships with him. Some people are engaged, and some people marry him. I was married to that man, and he abused me and used me and told me I was not good enough and told me that I would never be anything without him. He was an abusive partner, and therapy taught me how to take the steps towards divorcing my eating disorder. An incredible book that is absolutely brilliant that anybody even flirting with Ed should read is called Life Without Ed. It is a wonderful book. I think you can just get it on like Amazon. If I can find a link for it, I will leave it in the description bar below. Having that analogy really helped me separate myself from my eating disorder. This is me and this is my eating disorder. This is where we started, right? Well, slowly over time during therapy, I learned how to slowly separate myself so that my eating disorder was telling me certain things, but I was able to contradict it with my own thoughts. And as I got stronger and stronger and stronger, I moved further and further away from him, and I learned how to fight him. I can honestly say that I have a fighting heart and a fighting spirit because I learned how to separate myself from my eating disorder, and that built so much strength and contributed so much to the self-esteem that I have now, and I am so grateful for that. There were multiple things that we did to help me have a good experience in therapy. One of the biggest things, like I said, was separating myself from my eating disorder. One of the ways that we were able to do that, we did a little exercise on a day that a couple of my best friends actually came to therapy with me to learn more about my addiction. I mean, is that not the sweetest thing in the world that two 17-year-olds would come with their best friend to therapy and help learn and understand ways they could support me and help me? And my therapist brought out a jump rope, and she said, okay, Rachel, I want you to take this jump rope and put it in a circle on the floor, and I want you to try and make the circle the size of your waist. And I thought, okay, like, I'm sure I can do that. So I jumped up and I put the jump rope in a circle, and then I kind of stood back and like looked at it, made sure everything was right, and then was like, okay, there we go, that's the size of my waist. And then she had me stand up. She took the jump rope and she wrapped it around me 2.5 times. The reason this exercise was so beneficial is because that was an aha moment for me. I realized how severe my body dysmorphia was when she wrapped that jump rope around my waist. I also realized that I truly was mentally ill when she had my two best friends do the exact same exercise, and the jump rope fit around their waist almost perfectly when they drew it out for themselves. I thought that everyone saw themselves how I saw myself, and that was not the case. Slowly over time, I started to realize that maybe there was life without an eating disorder. There were so many ups and downs in therapy. I truly don't know how I made it through at times. I remember feeling the absolute lowest of lows when I would walk in and talk about how horrific my week had been, talk about the relapses that I had. I remember when I would go to therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and it was quite literally a miracle if I could make it from Tuesday to Thursday without having a behavior. And then slowly there became days and then weeks and then months between relapses. And I did have a small time frame, about 1.5 years in my recovery journey, where my behaviors were suppressed but not being healed, because unfortunately I was in an abusive relationship, which I think I will do a full video on if that's something that you guys want to see. I do think that's something that could really help other girls, especially young girls with low self-esteem like I had, but I can touch on that in another video. Let me know if that's something you'd be interested in seeing me make. I definitely was having suppressed behaviors at that time. So I went through small periods of not having behaviors while still going to therapy, But as soon as that relationship ended, all my behaviors came flooding back in because they were just suppressed and no healing really took place in that time frame. What I didn't realize is that although there were so many highs and lows of therapy, that everything I was doing really was adding up. That's something that I think causes people to quit therapy too quickly. You don't realize that everything that you're doing and all of the small effort that you're putting towards recovery really does add up. When I met my husband now, Hunter, he became a really key part of what really pushed me towards recovering fully from my eating disorder. Not only did he help me with the physical aspects of my eating disorder, because he always treated it as a very real and serious addiction, was willing to immediately go to therapy, even just after starting to date me, to find out how he could help me and ways that he could talk to me and when to back off and when to push me. But he also healed an emotional and mental side of me that I just question if anybody else really could have. The last time that I purged was on February 15th of 2016. And that was a couple days after Hunter and I got engaged. I spent my entire engagement period completely recovered, healing, gaining weight that was needed, enjoying food, making memories with my husband, and I can confidently say that I felt more beautiful than I have ever felt on my wedding day, and I had gained about 25 pounds in my engagement period. I am just here to tell you that that is absolutely possible. It is possible to live a life after addiction that is full and beautiful, and I always believed that my eating disorder would be a part of me, and I can tell you that it is absolutely not. I am a strong woman that does not have any tendencies, that does not have any behaviors. And although I have taken a loss of some privileges that other people may get, like dieting or competing in the fitness industry, that's something that I'm never gonna be able to do. Because of my history with Ed, I've learned that it's not worth it to start flirting with him, because I know how quickly it can turn into a marriage, and I'm not willing to put myself in that position. But I would trade those privileges for the life that I have now any day. I do plan on filming more videos that are more specific to certain topics about my eating disorder and surrounding eating disorders. If you have anything specific that you want to see, like how to overcome binge eating, or how to have a healthy relationship with food, or how to approach someone who you love that you think may be struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, I would be more than happy to expand on that and make more videos surrounding this topic, because I am so passionate about it. If there is one thing that you took away from this video, I just want you to know that there is hope and that there is life after addiction. Even if you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, it is there and it is waiting for you. You absolutely can heal from any addiction and live a beautiful, wonderful life. Thank you so much for sitting down and hanging out with me today and talking about something that is really vulnerable and a difficult topic to discuss, but it's really shaped me into who I am today. So I really hope that this video reaches the right people and can help you or a loved one. Please feel free to DM me on Instagram or leave me a comment if you have any questions or need advice about anything regarding eating disorders, and I'm excited to make more videos for you guys about this topic specifically. I love you. Thank you so much for continuing to support me. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.